Hey everybody, welcome back to Nikki T Live. I'm your host Nick Taylor, and today I'm hanging out with. I forgot to ask how to pronounce your last name, so I hope I get it right. Is it Tim Condon?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, yeah, Tim, how you doing today?
I'm very good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's been pretty busy at work, but like good busy. Shipping a lot of stuff and having fun along the way. So
That's always nice.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's going good. Um, yeah, so for folks who might not know who you are, would you mind just saying a little bit about yourself? And if you want to, feel free to mention maybe how you got into tech or what you've been up to, I guess.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Tim. I'm Tim Condon. I'm based in Manchester in the UK, and I am probably these days described as a back-end developer or server developer. Um,
Okay.
so I've been uh, working in software for 20 years now, nearly 20
Okay.
years. So I kind of fell into it a little bit by ending up doing computer science at university as a
Okay.
kind of backup option after deciding that I wasn't quite good enough at maths to do straight maths. Uh,
Okay.
and so I ended up doing computer science with a year in industry, which
Oh,
kind of
that's
got me
cool.
into software engineering, which I really enjoyed. So after that, I ended up in cybersecurity, doing pen testing and security assessments and malware analysis, and then pivoted from there into secure development and software engineering. So I ended up doing embedded stuff and server
Okay.
development, and then uh, decided to pivot into mobile development. So I joined the BBC in 2014, 2015,
Okay.
as a mobile developer, having never done any mobile before.
Yeah.
I managed to blag myself a mobile job, having done a few little tutorials, uh, and worked on some of the apps at the BBC there, which was a great experience because the apps were used by tens of millions of people every day. Um,
Okay.
and
That's
so that
cool.
kind of got me into Swift. So I did iOS and Android development, and that got
Okay.
me into Swift development. And then I came across Vapor back in 2016, just after it was kind of launched or created. And for those of you who don't know, and we'll cover it lots, I'm sure, over the course of the stream, is that Vapor is a framework for building server applications and APIs in Swift. So it's kind of
Yeah.
similar to Ruby on Rails, Django, or Laravel, those kind of things. And
Okay.
provides everything you need to build uh, fully functional web apps. So I kind of saw this and took a look at it and thought it was quite interesting. Um, at the time, I was writing a fair bit of Python, uh, some JavaScript. I've been doing some C Sharp, as well
Okay.
as kind of the day job of doing Kotlin and Java and Objective C and Swift. So I thought it'd be
Throw
a
a
really
few
good idea
things.
to just try going all in Swift. Yeah.
Yeah.
And ended up writing a blogging engine for Vapor back in
Oh,
the
very
very early
cool.
days. And that kind of got me into Vapor, and I wrote some tutorials and articles on it. I then joined a company called Codeco, which used to be called raywendlick.com,
Okay.
and did some video courses and books. And then it kind of took off from there. So I started a consultancy in 2017 and went full time in 2019, um, purely doing Vapor pretty much. And I've been doing that
Okay.
ever since. And then I joined the core team of Vapor back in 20, sometime during the pandemic, 2020,
Okay.
2021, I think. It's
Okay.
one of those years. They all kind of blur into one.
Yeah, yeah. It's like
Um,
it goes 2019 to 2024. It's like what
yeah,
happened?
exactly.
Yeah,
So I've been
totally.
part of the core team for a while, and we're responsible for the growth of Vapor and building it, involving it, and maintaining it. And so, yeah, that's kind of my backstory.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and I'm very lucky in that I get to work on open source probably 50% of my time, and then
Oh, that's
client
awesome.
work the rest of my time, which kind of gives me a good balance of being able to work in build out open source software while still getting the kind of experience and knowledge gained from using it in real world systems to see where the pain points are and what needs changing and stuff.
Yeah, no, yeah, your clients are the perfect way to improve Vapor potentially. So that's awesome.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah, no, no, that's a cool background. We kind of have somewhat similar stories to start, not the whole path, but like I went to uni as well for computer science, but I just didn't really know what I wanted to do really. I was pretty decent at math, but I never aspired to be like an academic. I have like there's a lot of academia in my family, but it just really didn't interest me. I think I'm just more practical, and but I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I did computer science. Came out alive. Probably played more rugby than studied, but that's another story.
Yep.
Um,
Know that feeling.
but yeah, yeah, but but yeah, no, I think it's super cool your path where like because you've gone into you were doing cybersecurity, like pen testing and all that, embedded systems, like you kind of did the whole gamut of things you can do in the industry. I mean, there's still a lot of other things, but that's like a pretty extensive, diverse, knowledge that you've gained over the years. So like my own security proficiency is really more like just following best practices, looking at OWASP,
Mhm.
stuff like that. But that's cool. You did some pen testing, and yeah, no, it's a real problem. Like, I mean, we're not talking about cybersecurity today, but like I don't know, it's one of those like ongoing threats all the time because things change constantly, and so hats
Yep.
off to everybody in that space.
Yeah, I'm quite
But
glad I'm no longer part of it, I have to say.
yeah, no, it's but I was gonna say, and we talked about this briefly before we went live on the stream, but I'm just gonna drop a link to. I dropped one for Vapor already, but I'm just gonna drop a link to the Swift language, the main website, and I tweeted this out if like maybe a month ago, but I felt really silly because I didn't realize that Swift was like a full blown language. And the reason why I thought that was because all I had ever heard of was mobile development and Swift UI. So I literally thought it was just for building out UI. And I mean, obviously that's still a language, but I didn't know it had other purposes, and I didn't also realize it's been around for quite a long time. Well,
It
relatively
has,
a long
yes.
time, you know. So like yeah, so I've discovered because I've been starting to. Uh, I like the feel of the language, like the syntax so far. I'm still
Mhm.
really brand new to it, but yeah, there's things I realized it's like so you can build CLIs with it, you can build web applications, and obviously like we're going to talk about Vapor, so APIs and web servers. I just really did not realize there was this all these things it could do, and then there's obviously Swift UI as well still, but
Yeah.
yeah,
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 Swift has been around since, I think, well, 10 years now, actually. It's 2014 when it was first announced and publicly launched, at least.
okay,
Um, and it was kind of designed in two parts. One of it was designed as a successor to Objective C, which is the language of choice for building apps for Apple platforms, so whether that's Mac OS or iOS.
yeah,
Um, and also as kind of like a replacement language that should be able to do it all. So go for everything from embedded to kind of front end full stack stuff. Um, and it was open sourced in 20 end of 2015. I think it
okay,
was right at the end of 2015, Christmas 2015. So as part of that, they released runtimes and compilers for Linux,
okay,
and that's kind of what started the whole server-side Swift ecosystem in a way.
okay,
Um,
okay,
there've been a few people kind of trying before the toolchains were released to kind of hack it in, but
okay,
at that point, yeah, it landed on GitHub as the project, and that's when kind of server-side Swift started and Vapor started, and it's kind of been going relatively quietly since then and growing and growing. There is definitely a
yeah,
perception problem in that people see it as an Apple only language.
yeah.
And there's
That's
been some
another thing
changes.
I thought
Yeah.
as well. Yeah,
Yeah. And there's been some changes this year that should kind of start to alleviate some of that. So Swift.org's had a bit of a redesign and more of a focus on server side applications and command line apps. The GitHub org is now Swift Lang instead of Apple. So a lot of the things have
okay,
been moved over to that, and that's an ongoing process. So yeah, so it's
yeah.
kind of growing and definitely finding its own feet, I think.
Yeah, it's yeah, like all those things you said. That's literally what I thought. I thought it was Apple only. I thought it was only for mobile development, and I literally thought it was just for UI. So yeah, lots of changes. Yeah, the you were mentioning how yeah they started working on Linux and stuff. I'm on a Mac, but I did notice that there's Windows support as well now. I'm not sure how well that is supported yet for
So
Swift.
yeah, so the as a language, from a language point of view, it's pretty much fully supported. Um, it can do everything that the other platforms can do. So Swift runs
Okay,
on macOS, Windows, and various flavors of Linux. So
okay,
Ubuntu, an old version of CentOS, Amazon Linux,
okay,
and a few others that you can find on Swift.org.
okay,
But yeah, in terms of server-side Swift applications on Windows, it's a little bit more complicated
okay,
because the main underlying networking library still doesn't fully support Windows, but it's coming.
okay,
It's being worked on. So
okay. Yeah. Yeah, but I'd say like in all fairness, a lot of people are probably using the subsystem for Linux on Windows. Probably if they're a
yeah,
dev, probably.
yep.
I mean, maybe there are some people that don't, but yeah, it's the other things that I found interesting is like so I haven't really ever used Xcode. I've done a couple of streams with some friends that do React Native consultancy and
Hmm.
um, but we didn't even there we didn't really have to go into Xcode. And then so when I started looking at Swift, because and this all came across my radar because I generally don't watch the Apple events. I love my Mac and I have a bunch of Mac stuff, but I'm not like a diehard for watching it. I usually watch the highlights, and then I just happened to see something about Swift, and then I was like, oh, I didn't know it could do that, or and that's how I kind of started digging into it. But there's visuals you can use it in Visual Studio Code, and that's how I've been like slowly exploring it. And so there's like a language server for Swift. So like just like others, like you can there's a TypeScript language server if you're in VS Code. So it's pretty cool that they've done that because that opens the door for pretty much any editor that most of the modern editors like uh, JetBrains, they support language servers. So I imagine this will help with the proliferation of Swift. Because
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah,
that was a community project started uh, 2022, I think, maybe
okay,
2021, by a couple of
yeah,
members from the community. Of so the source kit, the language server stuff has been around for quite a while,
okay,
but no one really kind of hooked into it properly. There were a few kind of extensions, and so it was a big community effort to kind of drive that. And then the Swift server work group, which is one of the work groups I'm part of for Swift, decided to kind of really get behind it and try and drive it. So
okay,
there's a guy called Adam Fowler who kind of took that by the reins and really developed the extension to a point where it basically is now, which gives you
okay,
pretty much everything you need. And then over the
yeah,
last 6 months or so, Swift engineers have been working on it as well to really kind of
okay.
nail out the bugs and add some more functionality and stuff. So yeah, you can develop in VS Code without any issues these days, which is quite nice.
Yeah, no, and I found the experience pretty good. I mean, I'm still spoiled from the .NET days working with Visual Studio .NET. I don't think I've ever seen a better editor, to be honest. I'm a big fan of VS Code, but like Visual Studio .NET still blows a lot of stuff out of the water. But yeah, the support in VS Code is really good. Like uh, I think I think the only thing I noticed so far, at least, is there's some refactorings you can't do. Like if I say rename a variable, it doesn't rename it everywhere. I'm pretty sure that's the only thing I ran into, but I could go to definitions and like I could navigate around pretty well. Obviously get the IntelliSense code syntax highlighting, so it's pretty solid. And
Yeah,
again,
the
yeah.
refactoring should be arriving in Swift 6, which will land in September. So
Oh,
um,
okay, cool. So
that should all be
pretty soon.
solved. Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, it wasn't that big a deal, but that's cool to know that it's actually coming out in September. But yeah, and like I said, I'm still like brand new to Swift, but I've found I'm really enjoying the syntax because there's stuff in like I'm a big fan of JavaScript and TypeScript, but there's certain constructs that don't exist in the language, and so like there's also pattern matching, kind of like Rust, which we still don't have in JavaScript. There's some niceties in there, and
Hmm.
I'm still discovering stuff, but so far it looks like a really great language, and um, so like shifting gears to Vapor. So obviously Vapor is built using Swift.
Yep.
Is I'm curious, like in terms, like I know you use Vapor for your consultancy. You're on the core team now. Um, uh, I don't know if you know this or not, but like, does like Apple use Vapor for, or like, do they, or is like Apple, not dog fooding and they're like, oh, we've got PHP and .NET sites, or I imagine they probably don't, but
So I know that Apple do use Vapor um,
okay,
for various systems, both public facing and internal.
okay,
So they are getting used. It's Apple that so Apple. There's a team at Apple that builds Swift Neo, which is the kind of low level networking library that the whole server side Swift ecosystem sits on top of.
oh, okay,
Um, so they've got a dedicated team that build that out. It's a very very high performant IO library essentially that you
okay,
can
yeah,
build servers and stuff on. So Vapor sits on top of that, and
okay,
it does all of the low-level gnarly stuff like interacting with the kernel and parsing HTTP packets and things like that. And then Vapor allows that allows Vapor to build a nice user interface on top of. But if you want kind of like raw speed, you can
okay,
use Swift Neo, but it's fairly complex to use as an end user. So most people use one of the frameworks that sits on top of that. But yeah,
okay,
they've got a dedicated team and they are using it internally quite
okay,
extensively. The new private cloud stuff they announced for their Apple Intelligence
okay.
things, the dub that uses Swift on the server as well. Um,
Oh, cool.
and part of the reason for using Swift is because of some of the benefits that the language has over more traditional languages, should we say.
Okay, gotcha. Just want to say hello to Bjorn and to Violated Sign in the chats. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, no, that's super cool. And um, I'll just switch us over to my pairing view in a second here, just so I can just show the Vapor site and stuff. But here, let's move on over here. I don't need my LinkedIn open, so let's just switch here for a sec. So um, so I guess let's talk about Vapor. So it's a web server, but what does the web server give you? Like, is it like really raw at its base, where it's like, yes, you can write APIs, which you kind of mentioned before the stream, but does it
Mhm.
come with like a templating language? Like um, uh, I don't know, because like a lot of the JavaScript ecosystem, there's React meta frameworks. There's older things like you could say like I want to use Express and I'll use like handlebars or something. Does it
Mhm.
does it ship with a particular templating language, or is it kind of just bring whatever you want?
So Vapor is generally pretty opinionated on how you can do things,
Okay.
but the core framework allows you to write essentially HTTP servers. You can also use it for command line apps, but generally it's designed for building HTTP servers, and it
Okay.
provides things like routing and middleware and authentication and validation and basically everything that you'd expect.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's also other packages that we have. Including Leaf, which is our templating language. So it's a kind of simple templating language. It's used less so for sites these days because most things are JavaScript single page applications,
Okay.
but there are still people out there using it for sites. But it's used quite a lot for generating HTML emails.
Okay.
That's a
Oh,
very
okay.
common use case for it.
Oh,
And
interesting.
as we also have other packages as well. So there's a JWT library, there's a WebSocket library, there's what else is Fluent, which is our database ORM layer. So
Okay.
that's a very big project as well, and that allows you
Okay.
to write database queries in Swift without actually having to touch SQL. So it gives
Okay.
you kind of
Nice.
type safe querying
Oh,
and does
that's
all the translation between database data and Swift models, which we can have
oh
a
that
look at later as well, actually.
yeah, yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so yeah, so
Yeah, that's super interesting.
it's pretty extensive, and it
Okay,
does
so I,
Vapor's very much a batteries included. Here's everything that you need to get going type of thing.
Okay. And this kind of ties into what you were saying. It's similar to Rail. I can't remember if you mentioned at the start of the stream or before we went live.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, okay, so that makes sense. And it's always a balance. And also, hey Fuzzy, thanks for joining us. Um, like it it's great when people have opinions. Like I want to use this, I want to use that, but it can also cause analysis paralysis. And like I'm more of the mindset nowadays. Like when I was younger, I'd just be like, I've got to do artisanal everything, and it's like, and it's fun and stuff, but like nowadays it's like I need to ship something. I don't have like 2 months to decide like what's the best orm, what's this, what's that. And so like, I think having opinions is good. Obviously, not everybody likes all the opinions made in something, but you know what? If you're able to ship stuff, I think that's what's more important. So
Yeah, Vapor's always been pretty opinionated. I think overall it does a good job of. I mean, obviously, I'm very biased, but I think overall it does a
yeah,
good
yeah.
job of navigating that kind of that line. And we provide various escape hatches as well for breaking out of some of the ways that we kind of try and push you to do things. So with Fluent, if you there are things that Fluent doesn't support because it kind of has to sit across all the different databases it supports. So there are
Okay,
things it
yeah.
doesn't support. So there are various escape hatches for jumping down to raw SQL or SQL kit and generating queries that way. So
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that makes
there
sense.
there are ways of getting out if you need it.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah, why don't we just kind of dig into something? I know you wanted to share something on your screen. Did you want me to drive and try and build something out, or did you want to show your screen? I'm good either way.
I'm happy. I don't mind. I'm happy
Okay,
to. How about if I share my screen and then you can just poke me with as
yeah,
many questions as you want,
perfect.
and then we can see where we
Let's
get
do
to.
that. Yeah, yeah, no, no, sounds great. Right. Also, I forgot to mention before the stream, if you see me constantly turning to the left, that's just me checking the chat. It's not me watching cat videos on YouTube because you're not interesting. So just forgot to mention that.
No worries at all. Okay, cool. So what we'll do, I think, is build a kind of quite simple REST API that has some
Okay.
interactions with the database and shows you how to handle JSON and routing and that kind of thing, and build out an API. The first thing you'll probably do with most projects is create a new project. And Vapor
Okay.
has a command line application called the Vapor Toolbox
Okay.
that is for building new projects. So you can do Vapor New and then give it a project name. Um,
Okay.
and this basically clones a template from GitHub that has various options that allows you to kind of build out your application that you need. So if you want to use Fluent, we say yes, and then it will ask you which database you want to use. So we're going to use SQLite because it's
Okay.
easier than trying to set up an actual database server for now. And then we're going to say we don't want to do any templating for now, and this creates a project for you.
Okay.
So you get a nice little ASCII art, um, and then we can go into our project and then open it up in our editor. So I'll use Xcode for today.
Okay.
So um, this is your project structure essentially. So you have your what's called your manifest file, and this is like your kind of where your application is defined. It's very similar to your packages file in TypeScript or JavaScript.
Yeah.
So you define your package, your name, your dependencies, and then your different targets as well.
Okay.
So we have a single target, which is called app, and then our dependencies on Vapor, Fluent, and SwiftNeo, which is the underlying library, which you won't actually need too much,
Okay.
and the SQLite driver. So if we open up Swift, so Vapor's kind of broken up out in the project at least into three different files. You have your entry point, which is kind of
Okay.
your main file, your main.java, wherever you want to do your kind of startup. And this is where your kind of application starts when you do Swift run.
Okay.
We do some kind of weird performance tricks in here that you don't really have to worry about too much, but essentially we get our environment, bootstrap the logging system, create an application, configure it, and then start it.
Okay.
Configuration is pretty simple. It's missing a tab. Um, So for us, we're just going to create our database interactions here. So we're going to set up
Okay.
SQLite by just specifying a file. We can register migrations, which we'll talk about in a sec, and then register our routes. And
Okay.
then in your routes, we have a kind of routing system that looks quite similar to some other languages and frameworks, but it's pretty uh, nice in the way that it does things.
Okay.
So
Cool.
this route, for instance, this is a route, a get request to /hello, and it just
Mhm.
returns a string. So we just return a string. There's no like messing about with response types and status codes and all that kind of stuff. If you want to return a string, you just return a string.
Okay.
If you want to customize that, you can and set custom headers and status codes and stuff like that. But
Okay.
most people just want to return a single type, normally JSON.
Okay.
Um, that's how it does. So if we want to do some routing, so if we want to say say hello to anyone, Vapor has dynamic path parameters, so we can
Okay.
do hello and then oops, and then hello name.
Okay.
So this is
Um,
basically the semicolon. The colon there says that this is a dynamic path parameter,
okay.
and that can be anything.
I was gonna say somebody in the chat's wondering if you can bump it your font up one more, like if you zoom in one more time, maybe. Oh yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, great.
Cool.
I had a quick question. This is just drawing parallels between other type languages like TypeScript. TypeScript you can infer stuff, but I
Mhm.
see here, like for example, the handler on line 9 here. It's an async function that's taking a request as the parameter, and it
Yep.
returns a string. If you were to, do you always have to explicitly write string there, like if, or would
No,
it infer? Okay.
it will infer it for most
Okay.
things. So that will compile absolutely fine.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, so to get the parameter, we can just do let name equals try request dot parameters dot require and then
Okay.
name. And there are ways of making this less stringly typed as well,
Okay.
if because that's a bit of a pain. Um, and then we can just do return hello name. And if you really want to be nice, you can capitalize so it capitalizes the name for you.
Okay.
Um, so if I build and run that, and then I'll bring up my REST client whilst that compiles. One of the things of Swift is that the compile times, certainly for the initial compile time, can be a little slow.
Okay.
Part of this is to do with all the type checking and some of the optimizations that it performs. But essentially, you trade initial compile times or compile times for performance
Yeah.
because it produces a very small, compact, efficient binary at the end of it.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh, I think that's fine though, because like I think for people who've worked with dynamic languages, they haven't had to do this. Like I
mhm.
remember some large C# projects or ASP.NET projects I would work on. Computers were less powerful too then, but like sometimes it would take a few minutes to compile something. So I can definitely appreciate that there's a bit of time to just compile it, and
Yeah,
that makes sense to me.
but we're only talking like a minute or two for most
Y-
applications, and then
Yeah.
you get incremental builds as well. So when we change it, it's a second or two.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
so if I bring across my REST client, which I'll try and increase the size of, so if I make a get request to /hello/vapor, um, this returns hello vapor. If I do /hello/Tim, not helpful, it
Okay.
returns hello Tim. Um, One of the really nice things about Swift, for instance, is if I make another GET request and we do, let's say, bottles and then count, uh, you can do that count equals try request dot parameters dot require.
Oh, nice.
So you can basically do the casting for you. And at this
Okay.
point, um, this is an integer and it cannot be anything else. The compiler will enforce that that's an integer. And
Yeah.
so this is where some of the type safety comes in. So if you try and pass this around as a string or any other type, it won't work. And you'll get a compiler error.
Okay. Yeah. And I think it's like I generally try not to cast things, but I understand in the context of like a lot of the stuff in web URLs, it's obviously string, like even if you're passing a number. So I think it's fair to do a cast in this particular scenario.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, you don't really have much of a choice in this instance.
yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, but cool. No, that's nice.
So if I go to /bottle/99, I then get my count back. If I do bottle/hello, I'll actually get a 42 back with
Okay.
error reason, and this is all handled by Vapor for you as well. So Vapor
Okay.
has a kind of inbuilt error middleware that handles a lot of these errors for you, and so you can just kind of throw Swift errors, and it'll
Okay.
get caught at a top level and returned correctly,
Oh no, that's great. Okay,
which is quite
perfect.
nice. Um,
Yeah.
so that's kind of basic routing. We can then talk about JSON. So in Swift, most JSON stuff these days is done using something called Codable, which is
Okay.
a way of encoding and decoding Swift types to JSON. Not always JSON, it can be other types, but most of the common ones are JSON.
Yeah.
And so you essentially define a struct that matches the JSON that you want to output. So if I
Okay.
wanted to output a JSON type that has a single key with a number, then you define it like that.
Okay.
Vapor has its own protocol, which is similar to interfaces in Java and Kotlin,
Yeah.
called content, and that basically wraps Codable, and that allows us to do some clever tricks with returning content types. So if you wanted to return, let's say XML, and you provide an XML encoder, then you could set the
Oh, that's
static
nice.
let was it default content type. So you could have .xml, .form data, URL encoded form, and it will just encode that as XML for you, and you don't have
Okay.
to do any of the decoding for you. So I
That's
can
really
then,
nice. So it does all the headers and everything.
yeah,
Okay.
and the content type stuff as well. So yeah,
Yeah, that's perfect.
that's quite a nice little trick. So in this one here, I can just return my bottles type instead now. And again, because you have the type safety, this is an integer. If I didn't do that, you get a compiler error.
Okay.
But because I've done the casting, I can then cast it. Oops. There we go. Oops. I need to bring that back. There we go. And then I can now send my bottles request again, and I get my JSON back that matches
Okay.
the type there.
Cool. Cool.
Oops. So handling incoming JSON is just as similar. So you can create a new type, make it conform to content, declare the keys that you want on it, and then create a new route. So this is going to be a post request. So you just
Okay.
do app.post because these denote the HTTP verbs. So we've got delete, patch, put that you'd expect.
Okay.
I think that's defined as user-info.
Yeah. SD in the chat saying, yeah, this is really nice.
It's quite expressive and pretty explicit. So to get the data, you can just do request.content.decode and then pass in your type,
Okay.
and that will decode it for you. So this actually looks at the content type header of the request.
Okay.
So if it's JSON, it will decode it as JSON. If it's form data, it will decode it as form data to the Swift types for you,
Ah,
assuming it
okay.
has a decoder for the type.
Okay. That's really nice.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then we can return another type. Yeah.
And so just the content there, that's a protocol.
Yes.
Is
So content
okay.
is a protocol in Vapor that allows us. It's essentially wraps codable, and it
Okay.
allows us to define how you return your data. So
Okay.
if you want to do a URL encoded form, you can set that, and then it will match that when it's encoding it to a response, and do that for you.
Okay. Cool. Cool.
Uh, so yeah, so if we go to our user info, I think I have this already set up. You get your thing, so you can change this to 99 and make the request.
Oh,
And
cool.
again, if we change this to a string,
Should error. Yeah.
you get
Okay.
the error for you. Um,
Yeah, that's nice, and that's out of the box. So
that's all out the box done for you. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Bjorn in the chat saying reminds me a bit of C sharp the way the extension is written.
yes. So Swift is quite similar to C Sharp in some of its uh, language types and expressions. Swift also has async await,
Yeah.
which looks similar to how C Sharp works. It's very different under the hood, but kind of
Okay.
it's how it's done under the hood, how it looks from a public point of view.
Okay.
Um, cool.
Mm.
Okay. Yeah. Any questions about some of this kind of basic stuff before we get into? I guess we'll
Yeah.
look at
Similar.
database stuff next.
Yeah. Sure. The first thing that stands out to me is like it's. I mean, obviously you do this all the time, but like it it seems very terse in a good way, and it seems pretty straightforward. Like even though I haven't done a lot of Swift yet, having done other programming languages, I can pretty much understand what's going on here. I think some of the things for me, it's more I'm still getting used to the Swift language. Like for example, like
Hmm.
on line 24, there's the try and then the request. So I'm assuming that's saying, you know, it's like a safe parse, and then like if it works, it sets it. Otherwise, it throws. Um,
Correct. Yes. So,
yeah.
so when Swift was first introduced, it kind of had four goals. Um,
Okay.
it was it should be easy to use, at least from a beginner's point of view. And there's this kind
Okay.
of concept of progressive disclosure, so that as you get more and more into it, you can unlock more and more advanced features. But for those of you building simple stuff, like just handling some JSON stuff, you can just write simple
Yeah.
code. Um, one of there's also performance. So as a compiled language, you can kind of get kind of C level performance if you write your code properly and
Yeah.
don't do too much stuff. The memory efficiency of Swift applications, especially on the server, is uh, it's a shock to a lot of people when I do client projects. So I've
Okay.
had conversations with like DevOps teams saying this application isn't doing anything; it's only using 50 megs of memory. I just have to say, no, no, that's what it's doing. That's how much it
Yeah.
needs. And previously, we'd be using gigabytes because it was Ruby or JavaScript or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
and then the kind of the big one that is a real benefit is the safety aspect of Swift. So Swift has a number of features that make it safe, essentially.
Hmm.
So it has really good memory safety. So it's very, very hard to write code that is memory unsafe in Swift. Um,
Yeah.
it has things like optional, so null pointer exceptions just are not possible in Swift. The compiler will not
Yeah.
let you write code that has that. And the same with error handling. So anything that can throw an error, you have to explicitly mark that as try. So
Okay.
this function is marked as throws because decoding might fail. So
Yeah.
you have to explicitly handle that with a try, which makes it very
Okay.
clear where the errors can be thrown from.
Yeah.
Um, this closure here is by default is a throwing closure. Uh,
Okay.
so that kind of handles it for you, and then that error bubbles up. But if you were writing this as a separate function, you'd have to mark that as throws, and then anything called out function has to mark that as try.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a really it's where Swift really starts to shine in some of its safety stuff. Some of the new
Yeah.
things coming in Swift 6 around data race safety are very powerful. So there's a thing called
Okay.
sendable, which will essentially provide compiler checking on data race issues.
Okay.
So that if you have full sendable checking turned on, you will never experience a data race crash.
Oh, that's cool.
Um, it's not
Yeah.
possible to write that code. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, no, and in the chat they're saying, yeah, the try syntax, it looks really good. Yeah, I agree that, like, I mean, if you've done any C like languages, the try is very familiar, so that stands out
mhm,
right away. The you're talking about, like, not consuming a lot of memory, and uh, again, I'm still super brand new to the language, but I've just been listening to podcasts and stuff, and so, like, if you're using something like C sharp or Java, there's garbage collection, but Swift has the concept of ARC, which is I forget what the acronym stands for. I understand the concept,
automatic
but
reference counting.
okay, yeah, that's it. Yeah, so the reference counting, and I find this super interesting because, like, my understanding from garbage collection is it goes through generations, and it's just like it's literally like a garbage truck coming around the corner. Is there anything to pick up? Oh, somebody's
Mhm.
still using that, just keep going. Whereas with arc, the reference counting, it's literally like, okay, you just created like a variable, up the count. Oh, you just left this scope that doesn't exist, to decrement the count.
Yep.
And one thing I found super interesting about it, because like I do use like weak maps sometimes in JavaScript,
Mhm.
and I've the the answer in arc was like very simple, and to me it seems super smart. Oh, it's a weak thing. Oh, just don't increment the count. So like,
Yep.
I just found that super fascinating. Is all. It's a little tangent, but I've been trying to understand the language, so it's super interesting compared to, like, it's garbage collection to some degree, but not the same architecture, I guess, in terms of it.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of real time garbage collection.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, efficient city workers.
Yeah, there's a very long forums thread at the moment on Swift.org on the forums talking about uh, garbage collection versus reference counting, and
Okay.
yeah, it's one of Swift's kind of real uh, standout features in especially in high performance environments where you really care about your performance is the
Yeah.
lack of garbage collection. So I know Amazon use Swift for Prime Video.
Oh,
So
no
some of
way. That's
their
that's cool to know.
so some of their orchestration systems for processing videos are using Swift, and they were a team of Java developers who uh, basically Java was not hacking it for them, and they decided
Okay.
to evaluate a number of other languages, and Swift was chosen uh, partly because of its syntax and expressiveness,
Yeah.
um, because they felt that Rust was too complicated at the time. Um, and then comparing it to Go, Go's great, but it has a garbage collector, which
Yeah.
means that every so often, at a time that you cannot predict, the garbage collector kicks in and your performance tanks whilst the garbage collector is running.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have this big memory overhead because the garbage collector has to run through and search everything in memory. So Swift gives you what's called deterministic performance, which means that you can be kind of pretty sure in the consistency of your performance when you're running your application, in that it's always going to be at the same level. Whereas garbage collector apps kind of spike up and down, uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
which can be quite annoying when you're trying to allocate resources, um,
Yeah.
which is a really
It's
neat feature of
it's
Swift.
yeah, it's super fascinating, and like, the idea is, I mean, it's a very powerful concept, but it, like, the idea is so simple,
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
but and I kind of treat it like simple doesn't mean it's like easy, or like just taking shortcuts. Like, I always kind of, when there's like things like this that I find fascinating, I always think about, like, I snowboard in the winter, and I have like a toolie box on my roof of my
Mhm.
car, and you can buy boxes for your cars where it's like, okay, uh it'll still put stuff in there, but it took a lot of work to build the Thule box, but they made it so simple. You can literally open it on either side. Maybe people have copied this since then. Like, the engineering to do that is more complicated, but like the concept ends up being simple. And I always think of that whenever I see stuff like this, because and I'm surprised. Like, I mean, I guess existing languages you couldn't say like, let's go back and change it to Arc, because like that would be like a massive undertaking probably. And but
Yeah, there was a discussion on that thread. I think it was it might be Erlang. I can't remember which one, but there is a language that has a optional reference count model that you can opt into.
Okay.
Um, but it is a
Okay.
trade-off. Like there, essentially, you're giving away 0.1% performance for that knowable consistency,
Yeah.
where you don't lose 30% performance at some point. Um,
Yeah.
and it is possible to shoot yourself in the foot and create reference cycles and memory leaks if you're not
Okay.
careful. But obviously, there's tooling to detect that and stuff. But it is
Yeah.
possible to create strong reference cycles and shoot yourself that way.
Okay. But yeah, no, yeah, it's always about trade-offs, but yeah, no, like I said, I'm still digging into the language, but I found that super fascinating to myself.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay, cool, cool. Yeah, so yeah, I guess there's a couple other things, and then we can kind of dig into some of the database stuff. So, like, there's structs are typically the construct you should go with, from what I've understood in Swift. Like, classes are great, but it's typically when you really want to have some kind of managed state, which is typically what you would do with a class. But like, I was just curious about this because like I know structs, it's a value, it's not a reference. So like
Correct.
I
Yeah.
feel like there's a trade-off there too.
Yeah. So structs are value types, and they're stack allocated rather than heap allocated, unlike classes. But the general, I think the general guidelines these days is start with a struct, and then if you need
Okay.
reference semantics, change it to class. Um,
Okay. Okay.
so there are legitimate use cases for using classes. Um, Swift also has a type called an actor, which is a reference typed synchronized shared mutable state type. Um,
Okay.
so it allows you to access things from different concurrent contexts,
Okay.
and the actor will manage that synchronization for you. So you don't need to manually add locks and stuff. Um,
Okay.
so if you need to do kind of thread safe stuff, then you have actors as well.
Okay.
But yeah, generally a lot of stuff in Swift is structs because it's a bit simpler. It's also much more safe as well,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a structs have copy and write semantics, so that when you create a copy and you try and change it, you have the same thing until you change it, and then you get a copy of that struct, which means that if you're sharing a type around or struct around, because enums are reference types, enums are value types as well in Swift, and
Yeah.
enums can be pretty full featured. They can have functions and variables and associated values. They're very powerful in Swift. Um, in that you can't have memory safety issues with, or kind of data race issues with
Yeah.
value types in Swift,
Yeah.
which
That
is
that that
why
was the thing. Yeah.
you should generally go for them.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. But as always, it depends. But by default, like if I'm starting to learn Swift, I should just default to structs unless I have a specific case.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, that's good to know. Cool, cool, cool. Yeah, no. Again, I'm still discovering these things, and I'm finding the language super interesting. But I know we're not
mhm,
here necessarily to talk directly about Swift. But so let's dig in some more into Vapor. So we've looked at creating routes here. We've been able to return different MIME types like XML or JSON. So yeah, let's look at you were talking about the ORM layer, I guess the database
yeah,
that you wanted to kind of dig into next.
yeah. So let's create the model. So um, the uh, uh, um, so the template comes with some models already set up for you.
Okay.
Let's create a new one to make it easy. So import Fluent and import Vapor. So I'm going to create a new uh, model for my reminder. So this one is
Okay.
going to be a class because Fluent requires reference semantics to do
Okay.
some of the stuff that it does. So I'm going to call this a reminder, and I'm going to make it conform to model. Um, so yeah, so we need to first off define the schema, which is essentially the table name.
Okay.
So we'll just call that reminders. And then we're going to have our different properties, which is going to match up with the table in the database. So we're going to have
Okay.
an ID, which is just going to be a UUID. So you notice that these are vars instead of lets. So
Okay.
lets are mutable and vars are mutable, so the variables.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
if you try and mutate a let, you'll get a compiler error.
Okay.
And then we'll add another type, which is going to be, let's just call it title.
Okay.
Let me just actually double check what I set the reminders. Yeah, title. Okay, cool. And this
Okay.
is going to be a string. Uh,
Okay. Cool.
and I think that's everything we need for now.
Okay. And
Um,
just before we move on there, so this looks familiar a bit in C sharp land, like they had decorators, but these are these
yeah,
annotations. So at ID, is that a fluent annotation to say that this is an ID field in the table?
correct. Yes. So this is what's
Okay.
called a property wrapper in Swift,
Okay.
um,
Property wrapper. Okay.
which are ways of decorating properties.
Okay.
So this allows us to do some pretty interesting stuff with models. But the main reason we have this for now is that this is the column name in the database. So if
Okay.
you had, say, uh, you're using snake case in your database, but Swift is generally
Okay.
camel case, you can specify that, and that's how we link it up.
Oh, okay.
Um,
That's nice.
it also gets quite interesting when you start looking at relationships as well, because there's a parent property wrapper that allows us to do some really nifty stuff with relationships and model inflation, so that you can have a type that references another type, but you only store the ID of that type in the database. But that's probably a bit
Okay.
out of scope. But we can look at that if we have
Yeah,
time.
but like a join
Um,
table, kind of.
yeah, so it's you can model parent-child or one-to-one and one-to-many relationships and many-to-many relationships with pivot tables. But
Okay.
there's a lot of syntactic sugar that Fluent has to make querying those relationships very easy. Um,
Okay. Nice.
I'll just go back and change that. So this is how you define a model. We might want to provide an initializer as well, but we probably don't need to.
Okay.
Uh,
And
if you,
quick question there. Sorry to interrupt. Is it
yep,
init like a constructor in other
yes,
languages? Okay.
yep.
Cool.
So that's just the constructor of the type. You can have
Okay.
multiple constructors as well if you want to do type overloads.
Okay.
But if you do provide a constructor, you need to provide this empty one, and this is purely a Fluent thing because
Okay.
of the way that we abuse the type system in Swift, essentially.
Okay.
Um, so Fluent allows you to do partial model inflation. So if you've got a database table that's got, say, 1,000 columns and you only need two of them, you
Yeah.
can write a query that only requests those two columns.
Hmm.
And by providing this empty initializer, because these are all wrapped in property wrappers, we can
Oh,
actually
okay.
partially inflate the model, even though normally in Swift you wouldn't be able to do that.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
So this is a requirement if you have an initializer to add this in.
Okay.
So yeah, that's your model. They're pretty simple. Again, there are ways of de-stringifying this as well, which will there are articles out there if you need, but we probably won't cover that today.
Okay.
Uh, and then the other side is the migration, because we need to be able to create the table in the database. So we'll just
Yeah.
write to migration for that. So we only need Fluent. And this is going to be an async migration. So the reason why it's called async migration and not migration is because Fluent was written before a time where async await existed.
Oh, okay.
So we've kind of had to retrofit a lot of that onto Vapor. There's a new version of Vapor coming out towards the end of this year, where it will be async await from the ground up. So from a public point of view, you can write everything async await these days,
Hmm.
but internally, a lot of it's still based on futures and promises. As an FYI. So migration has two parts. You have a prepare and a revert, which is when you run your migrations and when you roll them back. The revert is
Okay.
quite simple. We're just going to get our schema, and then let's just delete. To create our table, we need to create the table definition. So again, we'll set the reference up to the table. uh,
Okay.
and then we're going to have our ID column. Uh, we can just use .id because Fluent has some defaults for that, which
Okay.
again you can override if you need. That needs to be marked as a wait, as does that.
Yeah.
Um, and then we can do .field, and this is going to be our title.
Okay.
It's going to be a string, and it's going to be required. And then you call create, and that will create
Okay.
the table for you if you run that. So
Okay.
there's no SQL that you need to write, which is quite nice. You can set up references as well. You can set up constraints and foreign keys and indexes if you want as well,
Yeah.
all in Swift without having to. And it's all done as type safe as well, so it's hard to mess this up.
Okay.
Um,
Um, Fuzzy in the chat is saying, as cool as this is, the language is kind of messing with me. I don't know if that's negative or not. To each of their own, I guess. He says it's, I think he's being trying to be funny here. It's like if Java was spoken very swiftly by a German. I don't know if that's just using swiftly to be like Swift. But um, I did have a quick question, a syntactical question.
mhm.
Uh, I think I read about this recently because again, like I said, I'm super fresh to the language. But is it when you do like a dot string or dot required? That's a value from an enum. Is that what that is?
Yes, so it's an inferred type, so you could be
Oh, okay,
explicit. So if you want to be expressive, you can do. I think it's data type. Oh, actually,
okay. Oh,
I
there's
can't
a
remember.
there's a great question after too.
Uh, yes, it's database schema dot database type. So you could do
Okay,
database schema dot data type dot string if you really wanted.
okay,
Uh,
okay. Just
but
verbose though. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, Glenn in the chat is saying, "Hey Nick and Tim, Microsoft SQL Server has appreciable share of the enterprise database market. Are there plans to develop a SQL Server driver for Vapor?" I,
So someone is working on it. Yes.
okay, there you go, Glenn.
So one of the really nice things about Swift is that you can. It has kind of like native interop with C and C++ now.
Okay,
So it's always had interop with C very easily. And C++ landed 6 months ago, a year ago. It's not
okay,
completely there, but it's possible to basically just put in C++ and C libraries and call them natively without any weird translation layer. Um,
okay,
so you can just import your library and it will expose a Swift interface for you that you can then call down to.
okay,
So it's very easy to wrap a C library, existing C library, and
okay,
just provide some nice Swift interfaces for it. Um,
okay.
so I think someone
Uh,
is working on it. I have seen some movement on that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Glenn says awesome. And this kind of brings up a question for me is like obviously Vapor is open source. There's
Mhm.
a lot of stuff that you ship out of the box. Um, in terms of the community, is there a lot of people that are creating extensions for I don't know if extensions is the proper term, but like to kind of to like Glenn's question, like say somebody wasn't developing a SQL provider, a SQL Server provider, somebody could obviously create one and then just but I'm curious, how's the community been with the project, like in general?
Yes, I mean, Vapor is it's been pretty awesome. So back in the early days, things were quite sparse, like any new ecosystem. These days, I'd say it's very rare that I end up having to write something custom for clients.
Okay.
So there are packages out there for pretty much everything, whether it's AWS or Redis or Cassandra or uh, most database open source database drivers, at least database
Okay.
servers. Um, but Vapor does have a pretty big community. It's always had a big focus on community, and has always been community driven, which I
Okay.
think is one of the reasons why it's still going. Um, because there have been other server-side Swift projects that have come and gone, and most of those were backed by industry. So there was one backed by IBM, that
Okay.
IBM pulled funding and it died. Um, there was another one that was VC backed and it ran out of money and it died. So Vapor's always had a great community, and there are lots of community packages out there. There's one for Google Cloud. There's one for doing PassKit in iOS devices. The Redis library originally is a community thing that's been pulled into
Okay.
the Swift ecosystem. Um, so yeah, it's very simple to write packages for Vapor
Okay.
and other server languages or libraries rather.
Okay. And I have one follow up to that, which is not related to the community, but I was talking with some people from React Native Land, or Expo, which is a React Native project, and they were saying like you can you can build a backend and ship that with your app,
Mhm.
like within the app itself. It's not like a server sitting somewhere. Is
Mhm.
that something that people do sometimes if they're building an iOS app? Would they ship like a small Vapor client with it as well to just do like
Yep.
maybe local first kind of things? Or okay,
Yep. So it's definitely possible to run Vapor on iOS. It's
okay,
not that common, but it is used. So I think one scenario that I've come across that's uh, not common, but I've seen a couple of times is streaming encrypted content. So
okay,
generally, if you're doing like DRM encrypted content, you need to run a local web server that will stream the unencrypted content as it
okay, yeah.
de-encrypts on the fly. So Vapor is a great use case for that. It's used quite a lot for integration testing. So you can run the Vapor server locally in
Oh, cool.
unit testing land. So you just spin that up, and then your app can hit that rather than having to hit a real server. Um,
Oh yeah,
and yeah,
especially with like something like SQLite, I imagine for like that scenario. Or
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
okay, that's great. Yeah,
so yeah, it
yeah.
is used like that.
Yeah, no, lots of great questions in the chat. Thanks so much.
Yeah, keep
But
them
yeah,
coming.
yeah, so this is cool here. So like we've got the migration. So like in this particular case, we're starting fresh. So we're just saying create the table. But
Mhm.
let's assume like maybe we'll get to this after. But like let's assume like we've got tables deployed already. The app's been in production for like a year or something, and then we're like, okay, I need to add I don't know, an email field to the reminder table, and then we have data that we might bring into. Is it essentially the prepare and revert? They're always just wrapped in a transaction. Is that
Yeah,
how? Okay.
essentially, yeah. So when the app starts up, or rather when you run the migrations, because you don't have to run the migrations when the app starts up if you don't want
Okay.
to, because big apps don't want to do that. Um, yeah, it starts the transaction, queries the migrations table, and then run through the migrations and see which it has run and which it hasn't run.
Okay.
Um,
Cool.
so if we wanted to add a date field, then you just write it as this. So dot field dot date. Um, you could do dot required as well, and then uh, it would be dot custom and then dot SQL. I can't remember the syntax, but there is a dot default as well somewhere. It's something
Okay.
like this. There we go.
Cool. Cool.
Um,
Oh,
something
hey
like that.
Ryan, thanks for joining us. Uh, okay. There's a question from Ryan too.
Mhm.
I'm really enjoying this conversation, by the way. There's lots of
Yeah.
super interesting stuff. Yeah, Ryan's saying you might have touched on this already, but I'm listening in between work meetings. Why use Swift rather than a cross-platform language like React Native? I understand your sole focus is Mac OS or iOS, but the ability to create native apps or other platforms seems to be appealing to use Swift. Um, well, we kind of touched on that it is cross-platform, so I don't know if I guess his question is more like, yeah, maybe in the context of a mobile app, why?
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of React. I'm a big fan of
Mhm.
TypeScript, so like, I definitely I guess there's trade-offs, I guess. But
Yeah, there are trade-offs. I've come from the mobile world where, so one of the apps that I worked on, BBC iPlayer, I think maybe every 18 months we'd have someone new come in and say, we should do this as React Native or whatever, another cross-platform thing. And the team says, sure, prototype it. Uh, and then 2 weeks later, yeah, it doesn't work. It's not performant enough. The scrolling is really bad. It's pretty, it's possible to write a good React Native app, but I'd say it's quite
Mhm.
hard in a way that feels native. I don't know
Okay,
what the state of the US banking system is for apps, but in the UK, it's pretty awful. And it's
okay,
very easy to tell which banks have got native apps and which banks do not have native apps. Um,
okay, yeah.
yeah, I
I
think the cross-platform stuff, like it's very good for getting stuff up and running quickly. And I don't know how well the one code base for different platforms plays out. Um,
okay.
in my experience, at least, but I'm not a mobile developer these days, so I could be very wrong.
Yeah, like I'm not a mobile developer either, but I was chatting recently with Jamin Holmgren, who works at Infinite Red, which is that React Native consult. Sorry, yeah, React Native consultancy, like I was mentioning, and they use Expo and all that stuff, and they've had a lot of success with it. And that's not to knock Swift or anything,
Mhm.
um, but I think what I've understood from the trade offs are like, and again, I'm not in this world really that much, so aside from just like building a hello world kind of thing, but it sounds like you can build great experiences, but there's also still the hatches, escape hatches to bridge things to native, because in some cases it really does make sense to bridge to the native stuff. But again, uh, I don't know because I can't give my own experience because I don't have enough experience with React Native, but I have heard a lot of good things of it, but I've also heard a lot
Yeah.
of great things about Swift. So
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely just a trade-off. From a language point of view, they have very different goals, I'd say, in terms of what they want to do. I think one of the issues we've had in some of the client projects I've worked on with React Native is adopting new features, like platform features. So when iOS releases a new feature in iOS that's going to come out in September,
yeah,
that those things just don't exist in React Native. Um,
okay,
so dark mode was a big problem for a while. I remember that, and that React Native had no concept of dark mode, and
okay,
all the project managers and POs were saying we need dark mode because it's part of the app and you can't add that easily.
okay.
So those kind of things that take time for it to be integrated into the framework um, can is a trade off again.
Yeah.
But yeah, like everything's a trade off at the end of the day in computer science.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's not just an escape answer. It really is true. It's like,
Yeah.
uh, because I know people make fun of seniors sometimes. Oh, you're just gonna say it depends, but it really does in a lot of cases. Like if there was like a one size fits all, like we wouldn't be having a lot of conversations or debates about a lot of things. So,
Mhm.
but anyways, cool. Okay, yeah. So let's keep moving on here. So, like you were saying, just to recap for the new people that joined in. So we're working on this is like a database migration. It's using Fluent, which is the object relational mapper, the ORM for that ships with it ships with Vapor, but it's not directly part of Vapor. It's its own thing.
So it's part of the Vapor project, but it's
Okay, it is. Okay,
yeah, it's part of the Vapor project. It's maintained by us and built by us. Um, but it's kind of if you don't use database stuff, then you don't have to have it as part of your project.
okay, I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so basically, Tim was just going through creating a migration here. So you have two functions on the struct. You have a prepare, which is like what you're gonna do, and then you have a revert, and that's like if things go wrong. And basically, this code under the hood in SQL land is wrapped in a transaction. So if it's successful, the transaction finishes. If there are issues, the transaction does a literal rollback. And yeah, that's kind of where we were. And thanks again. Lots of great questions.
Yeah, keep coming.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, I'll let you continue there.
Yeah, cool. No, more the merrier for questions, definitely. Okay, so now we've created our migration, we're just going to register it. So we'll just add it to the list of migrations. And then also we need to run our migrations as well. Uh,
Okay.
so you can run this out of band if it makes more sense for your app, or you can run it when the app starts up.
Okay.
It's not for most apps, it doesn't make a huge difference. Um,
Okay.
okay, cool. So I'm actually going to create because our roots file is getting quite big. I'm going to create a new controller um,
Okay.
just to kind of break the roots out a little bit.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I imagine that's generally a good convention, anyways. Like I mean, you were doing a demo before, but we would
yeah,
typically break them up into their concerns.
yes, definitely, yeah. So for
Yeah.
things like a REST app or REST API, usually you'd have like one resource per controller, one controller per resource. Sorry.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
so we'll create a reminders controller, and it's going to conform to root collection, which is another protocol that is literally a collection of roots. Uh, and this has one function as a requirement, which is this boot function, and this is where you register your roots. So we're going to create. Let me just register this first, so that when we run it, it works. So that should compile. So we're going to create a couple of routes. So the first one is obviously create a reminder. So
Okay.
this is going to be a separate function now, rather than the closure like we saw before. This
Okay.
is going to be async. It's going to throw, and then we're going to return a reminder once we're done. So we're going to send the reminders data to our API, decode it, insert it into the database, and then return it once it's been saved. So
Okay.
as before, we can do get our reminder. Self. We can then do our insert into the database, which in Fluent Land is that. And then we can return our reminder.
Okay. That's
So
also
this
really
does
interesting.
everything
The
for you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, the try syntax for those who joined a little later. So this is basically kind of like a safe parse or run the action safely, but if there's an error, it throws. But uh, that's cool that you can do it with with an await as well. I thought it was
Yeah.
just for non-awaitable things. Okay.
No, so you can do it with the waitable things as well. So
Okay.
anything that's marked as asynchronous, so this create function is marked as async, which
Okay.
means that it can suspend. You have to explicitly mark those as potential suspension points in your code with await.
Okay.
And it's part of how the compiler works. So we'll create another couple of routes to get all the reminders. So this is going to return an array of reminders this time. So we just
Okay.
like that. And then we're going to perform a query on the database. So
Okay.
in Vapor World, Fluent World, you write a query on the reminder table, and then do double. And then this needs to be marked as try await.
Okay.
So this does everything. This basically does a select star from reminders,
Okay.
and converts all the database rows into Swift types, and
Okay.
then returns it for you.
Okay. And I forgot to ask this, but just looking at this, I'm assuming this is it's MVC architecture, model view controller for Vapor.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
There are different ways of building it, but yeah, essentially we kind of recommend an MVC type thing.
Cool. Yeah. Cool.
Um, let's build a couple more routes, just to kind of show off some stuff. So we'll do get a single reminder. Oops. So we're going to get the ID from the request. Get ID. It's a UID, so we'll cast it to make it easy.
Okay.
And then we can do, so this is a kind of bit of Swift syntax here, which is the guard let.
Oh, that's nice. Is that kind of like instead of doing an if?
Yes. So
Okay.
I'll just
Yeah. These are things. These are the things I'm finding really fascinating and nice about. Like this is making it really elegant to me. Yeah.
so yeah. So in a guard let, you have to. So if we, I'll actually write it as both because that's
Okay.
quite nice. Because it shows off quite nicely why it's a thing. So if you did if let, you then need your else here,
Yeah.
and reminder is scoped to this if block.
Oh, okay. I see. That's
So
already
you
one
can't have it outside,
disadvantage.
and
Yeah.
then it's quite easy to kind of forget where it's used, and
Yeah.
then you need to do something in the else thing. Whereas the
Okay.
guard is kind of your early return. So inside the else, you have to return something.
Okay. Okay.
You either have to throw an error or break out the function or kind of return a default value or something.
Okay.
That needs to be
Yeah.
required.
No, that.
Um,
Okay.
so in Vapor's case, what we can do is we can just throw like an abort, not found, something like that.
Yeah.
And then we have our reminder as scoped out here, and you can continue on for the course of your function.
Yeah. This is really nice because like at least coming from like TypeScript or JavaScript land, typically if you had that if else, you'd be like you'd use a let which is mutable, not immutable in JavaScript land, and
Mhm.
then you'd be like if then maybe set it to something, and then in the else maybe you set it to something too, or maybe you throw, but like it's it's like I just like the compactness of this, and obviously like you were saying in the case of Swift, I guess it's only scoped to that if, so then you have to add another variable to say like set it to whatever there, and that other variable has to be mutable because you have to be able to set it as well, I guess. So it's like
Yep.
it opens up not a can of worms, well, kind of a can of worms potentially.
Yeah,
Uh,
and we have a kind of nested pyramid of doom as well, or kind of
yeah,
your happy path kind of gets into lots of nesting, and your errors are all out the front, whereas this kind of inverts it a little bit, which is
yeah,
quite nice.
yeah. Cool,
And
cool.
the other thing to point out as well is this find function returns an optional,
Okay,
which is a kind of Swift. It's actually an enum under the hood, but it's a very special enum. So an optional is a kind of a wrapper around a type that it can either be there or it can't. So
okay, yeah,
it's Schrodinger's variable. Um, and with optionals, you have to explicitly handle them. Um,
okay,
so this returns a non-optional. So if I try to do this, I get an error because
okay,
you you have to return something. So if that doesn't exist because the find doesn't find it and it returns
okay,
nil, you have to explicitly handle that.
okay.
Which is
That
why
makes
you
sense.
don't have null pointer exceptions in Swift. Um,
Okay,
you
yeah,
can force
yeah,
unwrap them, and that basically tells the compiler, "I know what I'm doing. This is definitely going to be here," and it will
yeah,
crash if not. But generally, you kind of have to handle them explicitly, which is quite
yeah,
nice.
and that explicit unwrap is probably something you rarely do unless you're maybe bridging to some maybe like a C++ library or something where you have to do something fancy maybe, um, but that's really nice. And also just to tie in what you said, so it's an enum. So by using the guard, the try await, assuming it's successful, that gives us the enum value that was the value, not the nil, and then the else is like that means that this reminder is the optional's like nil value, but we're throwing, and that's why it's okay. Or
Yeah. So
okay,
enum is, I think it's defined as that essentially.
okay, okay, okay. So
So
yeah,
this is basically a syntactic sugar for doing a switch and seeing if it exists or not.
okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. There's something similar. I haven't done a lot of Rust, but they have the same pattern. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. But side note, Rust I found a little more, definitely more complicated.
Rust
Uh,
Rust has definitely got a steeper learning curve, that's for sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, cool.
Cool. And then the final thing I'll do is let's do find reminder. So I'll do this just to kind of showcase some of the querying stuff influenced.
Okay,
So we can do parameters query. Of course, a query.
okay. So this is getting from the query string.
Yeah. So in the like a query string.
Yeah.
Um, it's been a long time since I've used this syntax. I think that's right. Yeah, cool. And then we can write our query. So we can do dot filter, and then we can kind of, let's say, filter on the title
Okay.
equals to our term, and then return to all. And so these, what have I messed up there?
Uh, is it because reminder.query could be nil, or I guess it
No.
defaults to an empty string? I think
Uh,
a query string. Yeah.
oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. You might need you might need to import Fluent. Yeah, yeah. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. So it's a bit of a Swift quirk in the way that some of our functions work. But yeah, you need to import it. That's a very common error that comes up quite a lot with
Okay.
both new people and experienced people. Um, so yeah, so this will basically perform a query. So this does like a select star from reminders where title equals term, that kind of thing. Um,
Okay.
so important things to note about this is that this is type safe again. So if title was an integer column, you have to pass an int there. It will fail. It will not compile if you pass a string,
Okay. That's
uh,
nice.
which is quite nice. And this is also uses binding as well. So there's no SQL injection because this
Okay.
would
Yeah,
be
I was gonna say. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
a red flag for some things like just passing that directly in, but this passes it
yeah.
in as a bind parameter. So it's actually
Okay.
quite difficult to do SQL injection
Yeah.
vulnerable code in Fluent. Uh,
No Bobby tables.
yeah, exactly. You have to drop down to a raw query, and then even then with a raw query, if you use default string interpolation, it's uses parameter binding as well.
Okay,
Um,
so
so you
so
really
you'd
have
have
to
to do
explicitly
something
mark
really.
in.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So like, okay. No, that's great to know. But yeah, I think most ORMs in general though would have SQL injection guarding.
yeah, you'd expect
But
it definitely.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, this again, this reads really nice, and so like, if you don't mind me just reading through it real quick. So we're
Go
we're
for it.
getting the reminders. So we've got the request coming in. The request dot query is the query string. Uh, I'm not sure why we're doing string dot self. I guess that's to say get the query string
Yeah,
and
that
then
shouldn't be
find.
needed, but it's
Okay.
because it can't use it. So you could do that as well.
Oh, okay,
Um,
okay,
it's the type inference, so it doesn't know what type it should be essentially.
okay. And then so basically, it's saying find the position in the query string where term is, and then it just pulls the value out. I guess.
Yeah,
Uh,
so if you had like a query that was like slash, it'll be slash API slash reminders slash search like that, and then it'll be term
term.
equals hello
Okay.
and date equals 123 whatever. So that will
Yeah.
put out this one here. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. And then just pull out the value. Yeah. No, that's nice. So you don't have to do any kind of parsing of the query string. That's good.
correct. Yeah,
And then just like usual, we're doing a try await. So like if for whatever reason it fails, it throws automatically thanks to Vapor, and then otherwise we just get our database query back. Uh, it might have zero or many results, but okay, yeah. No, that and again, uh, it just I find a lot of this is just reading really easily for me. Like
hmm
again, like I said, even if I hadn't done that little bit of Swift I've been reading up on, this like I can understand what's going on here, which I think
yeah,
not all languages is the case sometimes. So
yeah. I mean, this like so this syntax can be a little bit complicated because this is a key path to a property wrapper's projected value, which we won't go
oh
into.
okay, oh that part I didn't
Um,
realize. Okay.
but generally, when you're scanning the code, you can see that this is filtering the title equals this thing. Yeah, it does make sense, even if it's can be a little more complicated to write.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. I do want to be mindful of your time. I'm happy to go a little longer if you want, but we're booked for 5 more minutes. If you do want to chat some more, I can go for a little bit, but if you have a hard stop, that's cool too. Just wanted to
No, I'm
mention
happy
that.
to. Cool. I'm happy to keep you on
Okay,
for a little bit longer.
cool,
At least
cool.
demonstrate this, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to register these all as root set slash API slash reminders. Um, Vapor has a nice little helper to kind of so you don't have to write that all the time. Uh,
Okay.
so you can do let remind if I could type roots equals roots. Oh, I've really lost the ability to type today. Roots.groups. And then you can do API and reminders. So this is the same as when we were doing app.get API reminders before. And so if we register, so if we do a get request to get all reminders, we can just do get all reminders like that. So in Swift, you can pass around functions as types because
Okay.
they're first class citizens. What's that error for? Oh, yes. So reminder needs to conform to content. Uh, so I can just do that like that.
And a quick question about passing the functions around. They are they reference types in that case then, or are they still considered value types?
Ooh, that's a very good question.
I feel like they would like in other languages, like in JavaScript, if I pass a handler, it's a reference. So that's why I'm just
I
curious.
don't know is the answer actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, no worries.
Um,
Just
yeah.
throwing it out there.
So I'm just going to silence this warning with sendable.
Okay.
Um, so sendable is a new thing in Swift 5.10 and Swix.
Okay.
Um, and it currently can't be inferred, but it will be fixed in like the next in Swift 6, which is why
Okay.
I have to mark these as things, even though I shouldn't have to. Otherwise, you get a warning.
Gotcha.
So cool. So we're going to do again reminders routes dot post. So post request to /API/reminders will go through to our let's go on there. Create reminder.
Okay. Yeah. So we're just
And
putting the
then
handlers on all the roots and the different verbs. Okay.
yeah, we're registering then. So get request to /API/reminders the ID is going to use the get reminder
Okay.
one. What else have we got? Find reminders. So I'll do reminders routes dot get search use that. Yeah, so that's basically our routes registered. So if I build and run the app now,
Okay.
we should see quite a few things in the console. I haven't set the log library. I'll just set logging log level equals debug because then we can
Okay.
see stuff going across
Okay.
as we build it. So this is our routes registered now. This might cause an issues, but we'll see if it does. So you can see
Okay.
here that you get the SQL that's going across when it's trying to do the migrations and stuff like that.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So if we go back to our thing and try creating a reminder. So this is our response that's come back. We can see we've got our inserts here
Yeah.
done. So I can create another one that is like food shop, something like that.
That's
So
appropriate.
they're
I
all
have
there.
to eat lunch soon.
Yes. So if I do my get all reminders, you can see.
Okay. They're all coming out in the in JSON payload. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've created a
Okay.
couple with the same title there, which was an accident. And you see our food shop one that we just created there as well. So this is
Yeah.
our thing. So I think this is potentially using a database that I created earlier. Let's just change
Okay.
that to, what was it, 3, I think. Yeah, so you can see if I get the single one by passing a request to /API/reminders/ the ID,
Okay.
it
Yeah.
comes to our food shop. And then we'll create our search quickly. So that's going to be a get request to reminders /search. And then we're going to do term is equal to food shop. If I send my request,
Okay.
you can see
Yeah.
I
You
get my
get
food
it.
shop. Yeah,
Okay.
back.
Yeah. With the term and the query string. Cool. No, that's awesome. And uh, it honestly didn't take a long time to build this out. I mean, obviously we were talking a lot through it,
Mhm.
so like we slowed down the coding that way. But this seems very straightforward. Like obviously it was easier for me to just follow you doing it, but like this doesn't seem like something unsurmountable. You know, like I feel like pretty confident that if I were to go grab the Vapor docs and just start a new Vapor project, that I should be able to get up and running pretty quickly. Uh, I know we didn't really touch on this. Like we I mean, obviously the routes here, we're just returning data right now, or we're
Mhm.
posting to create things. Um, just a couple questions, I guess, before we wrap it up. So, like, if I was creating a single page app, obviously I could just say hit this API, and I could have like a whatever my front end is. That's fine. Um, but if I were to kind of thinking about, like, I was hanging with Josh Sear, who's a DevRel over on the Laravel team, and so like they can wire things up to, like, there's a project called Inertia, I think, where like but you could also do some server side rendering of like HTML. um, right now, because you were saying before at the beginning, obviously Vapor has opinions. It's very opinionated, and that's not a bad thing. But if
Mhm.
I were, if I wanted to start serving web pages with Vapor, and we don't have to go into this now, but like, what would that look like? Am I using? Is there just like a dot template or something, or what would you use or recommend?
Yeah, so if you want to do like fully server-side rendered applications, um, you can use leaf templating,
Okay.
um, which I don't know if some of the core stuff isn't actually in Vapor, but let's try it. Uh,
Like obviously you were returning some strings before, which you could
yeah,
literally do a string of HTML. But okay, so there's a view render. Okay, okay,
yeah. So there's Vapor has like a view thing on it by default, and I think this is just a plain text renderer,
okay,
and then Leaf has its own kind of stuff on top of this. So yeah, you could
okay,
do like home.leaf, and then pass in like you can pass in a dictionary, um,
okay,
or more complicated objects as well, by passing in a type, but that should compile fine, I think. So yeah,
okay,
there's ways of doing this, if you want to do like server-side rendering quite simply.
okay. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, no, I was just curious, and I'll drop a link to that too for folks. But I gotta say, we only went over a few minutes, but which is all good. But this looks like really compelling, and just to kind of bring it back to what I kind of mentioned at the beginning there. Oh, thanks. Glad you enjoyed it, Fuzzy. Um, uh, yeah, yeah. Just to bring it back home, like, I was just completely unaware that Swift did all these things, and like, I mean, that's partially because I'm not really in that ecosystem, I guess. But
Hmm.
like, the all I ever saw from like just Apple was like Swift UI and mobile applications. And oh yeah, thanks for the kind words, Ryan. Ryan found it really great to appreciate that. Um,
Thank you.
but yeah, I just thought it was for Swift UI. So like the fact that we didn't touch on CLIs because we were talking about Vapor, obviously. But so like, cross-platform CLIs, cross-platform backend stuff. Vapor is a great choice for that. It seems to be the de facto, from what I've understood, if you are building web servers in Swift. So yeah, just a lot of stuff, and it's yeah, I do find it a little surprising that I feel like it's been kind of under wraps. And again, this could just be me being in my own tech bubble, but like, it's like the first I hear of it from Apple, and it's only because I happen to catch that note about Swift 6 coming out. So, anyways, yeah, just
Yeah,
super cool stuff.
yeah.
Um,
There's definitely been a perception problem that Swift's had, that's slowly changing, and so I sit on the Swift server work group, which is a working group for one of the
oh,
working
okay,
groups for Swift. So it has a dedicated server work group, and we're kind of made up of people from Apple and Vapor and Amazon and other kind of stakeholders and stuff, and other companies. And we kind of
okay,
our role is to push Swift on the server forward. So whether that's liaising with the compiler teams and language teams to make sure that it has the features that we need, or
okay,
building out libraries that are missing, or and part of our focus of this year and next year is going to be branding essentially, and
okay,
more showcases, more examples. So Swift.org will probably have a few blog posts going on of like successful Swift on server projects.
okay,
Apple did a really good WWDC video this year of Swift on the server, talking about how they use it for uh, processing tens of millions of requests a second.
hmm,
Um, so it's getting there.
yeah.
It's a slow burn, but we're getting there.
No, that's super cool. And I'll kind of round it up with one last question. So like we've been working locally here, it's been great. What's the deployment story for like I imagine you can containerize this, so probably anywhere that Docker deployments are supported is or do people deploy as well to like a I don't even know if it exists, but like a raw Apple or Swift server, or is it really just Dockerize and just go to the races?
It's pretty much Dockerize it and wherever you host stuff. So
Okay.
there's a build pack for Heroku that's maintained by a community member, which is really nice.
Okay.
So if you want to deploy to Heroku, you can do that. But yeah, because it runs on Linux, generally you just Dockerize it and shove it where you want to, where the
Yeah.
rest of your apps are. Um,
Okay.
some
Cool.
people do run it on macOS. So if you're running on macOS, you get access to a lot of the Apple private frameworks
Okay.
that you don't get on Linux. So some people have got requirements where they need to talk to those libraries and they run on macOS. But
Okay.
yeah, I'd say just Dockerize it and deploy it that way. Much easier.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm just gonna drop some links where folks can give Tim a follow if they'd like to, and I'm just gonna drop a link to the Vapor website as well. Tim, this has been awesome. I had a lot of fun. This is super interesting. The language looks great. The framework looks great. Thanks everybody for the questions today. Lots of great chatter, and we'll be back next week. I'm just gonna drop the stream schedule if folks want to check that out. And yeah, thanks everybody. And Tim, if you just don't mind staying on for 1 second, and
Yeah, of course.
everybody else, enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks everyone.